It was just after sunset on a quiet Friday evening in downtown Atlanta. The streets were dimly lit, the glow of traffic lights casting long shadows on the asphalt. Kevin Harris, a black man in his early 30s, walked briskly from his car toward a downtown office building, dressed in a fitted suit, tie slightly loosened, and polished shoes, reflecting the streetlights. He had spent the day in client meetings, wrapping up a complex investigation for the FBI, and was eager to get home before the night stretched too late. As he approached the corner, two patrol cars suddenly pulled up, tires squealing lightly against the pavement. He barely had time to react before uniformed officers stepped out, moving with swift authority, hands hovering near their holsters. "Evening, sir." "Step aside," one officer barked, voice firm and unyielding. Kevin froze. "Excuse me?" he said evenly, glancing at the cars. "Am I being detained?" The officer didn't answer, instead moving closer with a hand on his belt. "You fit the description of a suspect in a recent disturbance," the second officer said, voice tight with practiced suspicion. Kevin blinked. "A description of what?" he asked, tone calm but questioning. "That look, I don't know what—" Before he could finish, the first officer grabbed his arm, attempting to cuff him without explanation. Kevin's eyes narrowed slightly, his mind racing. He wasn't armed. He wasn't resisting. But he had protocols in mind and authority on his side. "Gentlemen," he said, voice steady, "I suggest you step back. I'm an FBI special agent. Do you want me to show you my credentials?" The officers hesitated for a split second, uncertainty flickering in their expressions. Kevin continued, calmly reaching inside his jacket and producing his FBI badge with deliberate precision. The sudden flash of the badge illuminated the tension in their faces. "FBI Special Agent Kevin Harris," he said, letting his words sink in. The street felt still, as though the city itself paused to witness the reversal. The two officers recoiled slightly, eyes wide, hands frozen halfway to their belts. Kevin's composure did not waver. "Do you understand the situation now?" he asked, voice measured but firm. The younger officer swallowed. "Yes, sir," he said, finally stepping back. Kevin tucked his badge away and straightened his suit. Without raising his voice or showing irritation, he had turned the confrontation on its head. The officers, now fully aware of the error, muttered apologies. Kevin nodded once, curtly, and continued on his way, leaving the street behind with the quiet authority of someone whose presence carried the weight of law and experience. The encounter on the street did not end with Kevin merely flashing his badge. It lingered in his mind as he continued toward the office building. He walked with a measured pace, the city lights reflecting off his polished shoes, each step a quiet assertion of authority. He passed by small clusters of pedestrians who had paused mid-step, glancing at the scene they had witnessed. The sudden, tense arrest attempt and the immediate reversal the moment the badge was revealed. Few words were spoken aloud, but the air was thick with the unspoken acknowledgement of what had just transpired. Assumptions had been challenged, authority had been revealed, and appearances had deceived those who had acted hastily. Inside the building, Kevin entered the lobby and tapped his keycard, the glass doors sliding open with a soft hum. Security cameras tracked his movement, though they were merely procedural. Anyone watching would have seen nothing unusual. Just a man in a suit walking to his office. Yet, behind the composed facade, Kevin replayed the confrontation, analyzing every second, every expression. The officer's reaction had been immediate, but he knew that, outside the realm of his badge, many black men had no such authority to halt an unlawful detention. The realization settled in his chest. His life and career had granted him protection that was not afforded to others, and that disparity weighed heavily even as he moved with calm. At his office, he removed his jacket and hung it carefully on the rack. He poured a cup of coffee, dark and bitter, and sat at his desk reviewing case notes for an ongoing investigation. His colleagues had gathered around in hushed conversation, unaware of the street incident, focused on the complex web of financial fraud and corporate corruption they were tracking. Kevin joined them, participating in strategy discussions, his mind alert and meticulous. Still, the image of the officers frozen in disbelief lingered, a stark reminder of how quickly assumptions could override judgment. By mid-afternoon, he had returned to field communications, drafting reports and updating case files. Even in the hum of ordinary work, the earlier encounter influenced his perspective, sharpening his attention to bias, both overt and subtle, and reminding him of the importance of measured authority in every interaction. Outside, city life continued, oblivious to the quiet power displayed on that street corner. Yet Kevin knew that moments like this had lasting impact. Those officers had learned a lesson, albeit brief, and he had ensured that the law and the truth of his position was undeniable. As he prepared to leave later that evening, he walked back to the street where the encounter had occurred. The patrol cars were gone, the corner silent. Kevin's badge remained tucked safely, yet its presence, if needed, was a reminder. He had authority, competence, and the law on his side, and he moved through the world with the awareness of how differently it treated those without it. The city had returned to its rhythm, but Kevin Harris carried with him a quiet vigilance, ready for the next challenge, the next moment where assumptions might meet the reality he embodied with calm assurance. The following day, Kevin returned to the field office with a heightened sense of awareness. Though the street encounter had ended quickly and without incident, it lingered in his mind as a stark example of how perception and assumption could escalate in seconds. He moved through the office with calm purpose, greeting colleagues with quiet nods and reviewing ongoing cases that demanded meticulous attention. Agents moved efficiently around him, the low hum of conversation and keyboard taps filling the room as evidence files, case logs, and surveillance reports were reviewed. Kevin's own notes reflected the discipline that had carried him through years of high-pressure investigations. Patterns, timelines, and contingencies, all carefully recorded. Later, he was called to a briefing room for an urgent debrief regarding a multi-state financial fraud case. As he entered, senior agents and analysts were already seated, charts projected on screens, figures mapped out with precision. Kevin took his seat, listening carefully as the lead agent outlined new intelligence, connections between shell companies, and potential fraud pathways. His mind remained sharp, yet he could not fully ignore the memory of the officers on the street corner, the sudden hesitation, the disbelief, the way authority had to be demonstrated to be recognized. He considered how often that recognition was absent for others, how many lives were impacted when assumptions outweighed facts, and how easily bias could escalate to danger. After the briefing, Kevin walked to his car, parked in the secure garage beneath the office building. The black luxury sedan gleamed under the overhead lights, immaculate and commanding respect without a word. Sliding into the driver's seat, he started the engine smoothly, the hum of the motor echoing a sense of controlled power. On the drive back, he reviewed the day's events mentally, noting both procedural successes and areas where intervention might be needed to protect the innocent. Outside, the city streets were alive with traffic and pedestrian motion, yet Kevin's awareness of the world's constant scrutiny and latent bias remained sharp. That evening, as he returned home, he reflected on the encounter once more. He had acted within his authority, his badge and training, transforming what could have been an escalation into a moment of clarity and correction. Yet he knew the lesson extended beyond himself. Countless others lacked the protection afforded by his position. The incident underscored the responsibility carried by those entrusted with power and the quiet vigilance required to ensure it was exercised fairly. Kevin parked, stepped out, and moved through his home with measured calm, preparing for the next day of work, aware that every step he took in public carried both presence and purpose, and that authority, when combined with composure and integrity, could shift assumptions in an instant. The next morning, Kevin arrived at the field office earlier than usual, the streets still quiet with the soft hum of early traffic. The memory of the previous evening's encounter lingered in his mind, not as irritation but as a reminder of the fine line between authority and assumption. As he entered the building, security scanned his badge without comment, unaware of the tense confrontation that had occurred just hours prior. He moved efficiently through the office, exchanging brief nods with colleagues while reviewing surveillance reports, case logs, and witness statements from a multi-jurisdictional investigation. Every detail was meticulously cataloged, each observation cross-referenced with prior evidence. Later, a call came in from a senior analyst. "Kevin, we need your input on the enforcement discrepancies in the city's downtown precinct. There have been multiple complaints about stops without probable cause." Kevin paused, his mind already drawing connections. He recalled the officers on the street corner, their initial assumptions, and how quickly authority had to be displayed to halt the escalation. He reviewed reports and mapped patterns, noting how frequently these incidents disproportionately affected certain neighborhoods and demographics. With each note, he identified actionable steps, reinforcing the principle that vigilance, authority, and awareness were essential to prevent injustice. By mid-afternoon, Kevin was back on the street, though this time in an official capacity, walking through areas flagged for monitoring. Pedestrians moved past him, cars rolled by, and life continued as usual. Yet he observed with a trained eye, noting behaviors, patterns, and potential threats. When a routine traffic stop unfolded nearby, he watched from a discreet distance, recognizing the subtle signs of escalation and the officer's implicit biases. He made mental notes for reporting, not intervention, but the memory of his own street encounter sharpened his perception. How swiftly assumptions could override judgment, and how authority, when exercised correctly, could avert unnecessary conflict. As dusk fell, Kevin returned to his car, the black luxury sedan parked securely under the garage lights. The city's skyline reflected off its polished hood as he slid behind the wheel, engine humming steadily. Driving home, he reflected on the delicate balance of power, authority, and perception, knowing that while his badge protected him, countless others faced consequences without warning. The encounter on the corner remained a lesson, one that reinforced discipline, composure, and the responsibility inherent in every action taken in public spaces. By the time he arrived at his apartment, Kevin was mentally preparing for the next day, keenly aware that authority, when wielded with integrity, could turn tense moments into lessons and assumptions into respect. By midweek, Kevin's street encounter had begun to influence his work in subtle but important ways. At the field office, he reviewed case files and traffic stop reports, noting patterns of bias and unlawful detention across multiple precincts. He compiled detailed analyses, highlighting discrepancies between officers' reported actions and independent surveillance footage. The goal was clear: ensure that justice was applied fairly, and that those lacking protection weren't subjected to the same assumptions and snap judgments he had encountered. His colleagues respected his composure and insight, noting how he combined field experience with meticulous analysis. During a late afternoon briefing, Kevin presented his findings to the team. "We've seen repeated incidents where stops without probable cause disproportionately affect certain communities," he explained. "We can use this data to recommend targeted training, oversight, and, when necessary, disciplinary action. Prevention is as important as enforcement." The team listened intently, and even senior agents nodded in agreement. Kevin's earlier street confrontation had provided him with a first-hand understanding of the consequences of assumption and bias, which lent his recommendations both weight and credibility. After the briefing, Kevin returned to his personal errands, navigating the city streets with calm awareness. At one intersection, a routine traffic stop unfolded nearby. He observed quietly from a distance, analyzing the officer's approach, body language, and procedural adherence. His own experience from the week prior allowed him to notice subtle missteps: a hand hovering too long on a belt, unnecessary physical proximity, the officer's eyes scanning rather than communicating. Though not intervening, he mentally noted the irregularities for later reporting, reinforcing the importance of accountability and precise protocol. As evening fell, Kevin parked his sleek black luxury car in the secure garage beneath his apartment. The polished surface gleamed under the lights, a quiet testament to years of dedication, discipline, and accomplishment. He stepped out, adjusting his jacket, and reflected on the intersection of perception, authority, and responsibility. The street corner encounter had been brief, yet its implications were enduring. Assumptions could escalate conflict in seconds, and authority, when exercised correctly, could avert disaster. Kevin entered his apartment, prepared reports and notes in hand, aware that every day required vigilance, composure, and integrity. And though the city buzzed around him, he moved through it with calm assurance, a reminder that preparedness and respect for the law could turn even the most tense moments into lessons for those who might follow in his footsteps. By Friday, Kevin's encounter on the corner had begun to resonate beyond his immediate environment. Reports of officers halting stops after learning of his FBI affiliation circulated quietly through precinct communications. While he had not sought recognition or reaction, his composure had set a subtle example of authority paired with restraint. At the office, Kevin spent the morning reviewing a backlog of complaints from citizens who had been unlawfully detained or harassed during traffic stops. He cross-referenced those cases with body cam footage, surveillance records, and witness statements, identifying patterns of bias that had long gone unchecked. Each anomaly, each inconsistency, strengthened the case for oversight and accountability. Later in the day, Kevin participated in a strategy session with senior agents and analysts. Charts displayed neighborhoods with high incidences of questionable stops, and the conversation turned to preventative measures. Training alone isn't enough, Kevin noted. We need clear accountability, transparency, and constant monitoring. Officers must know that assumptions without evidence will be documented, reviewed, and corrected. His words carried authority because they were informed not only by policy, but by experience, by the first-hand knowledge of how quickly bias could escalate into wrongful detention. After work, Kevin returned to the streets in a supervisory capacity, observing routine patrols and interacting with local officers to ensure adherence to proper procedure. He remained calm, composed, and authoritative, but his presence alone conveyed a subtle lesson. Professionalism demanded respect for both law and human dignity. At one intersection, a young black driver was pulled over unnecessarily. Kevin stepped forward discreetly, observing the interaction and noting procedural lapses for reporting. He understood that, unlike him, most citizens did not carry credentials that could instantly halt an escalating situation. Finally, Kevin arrived at his car, the black luxury sedan parked under the building lights, polished to perfection, a symbol of his success and diligence. Sliding into the driver's seat, he reflected on the week's events. The street encounter had been brief, but its impact persisted in multiple ways, influencing officers' behavior, strengthening his oversight strategies, and reinforcing the principle that authority coupled with integrity could shift assumptions in an instant. Driving home, the city's lights reflected off the hood, and Kevin remained vigilant, aware that every step he took publicly carried responsibility. In the quiet hum of his car, he acknowledged the lesson that his role demanded: readiness, composure, and the unwavering application of the law, not for ego, but to protect those without the power to defend themselves. Weeks after the street corner incident, the repercussions continued to unfold in ways that reinforced both accountability and respect. The local precinct had implemented new internal reviews, prompted by Kevin's immediate demonstration of authority and the broader patterns he had documented in his reports. Officers were receiving additional training, not as punishment but to prevent further incidents, with a focus on recognizing bias, adhering strictly to procedure, and treating every citizen with dignity, regardless of assumptions. Kevin remained involved in the oversight, quietly ensuring that measures were effective and data-driven. At the field office, colleagues sought his guidance on implementing protocols for on-the-spot verification and de-escalation. Kevin provided insight not as a lecture, but as an example drawn from his own experience. How presence, composure, and authority could prevent an unlawful arrest in seconds. His input shaped policy updates that would influence training programs across the district, reinforcing accountability for officers and protection for citizens. Outside work, Kevin maintained the rhythms of his personal life. He returned to his luxury vehicle each evening, a polished black sedan reflecting the city lights, symbolizing the stability, discipline, and achievement that underpinned his life. Yet, he never flaunted it. The car was practical, a tool as much as a symbol. His neighbors and colleagues knew him for his quiet professionalism, but the viral clip from the street incident had already circulated widely, demonstrating to the public the balance of authority and restraint that defined him. In the city, the officers who had initially approached him with assumptions remained aware of the encounter. The moment of hesitation, the flash of the FBI badge, and the realization of Kevin's authority served as a lasting reminder. The law existed not to assert dominance, but to protect truth and justice. The story became a quiet lesson, shared among peers and trainees, illustrating how bias, unchecked, could escalate, and how professionalism could immediately correct a potentially dangerous situation. For Kevin, however, It was never about recognition. He moved through the streets, offices, and meetings with calm assurance, fully aware of the privilege his position afforded him and the responsibility it entailed. Each interaction carried vigilance, integrity, and composure, a combination that prevented assumptions from dictating outcomes. The city continued its rhythm around him, traffic lights blinking, pedestrians moving, life unfolding. And in the midst of it, Kevin Harris walked forward, fully in command of his authority, applying the law with fairness and leaving a quiet but enduring impact on every system and person his presence touched.